Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, today the talk continues to be about the destruction of the Nova Harkova dam. The Nova Kakova Dam that took place within the last 48 hours. So at this point, I would say it is essentially irrelevant to talk about who may or may not have destroyed the dam. In this type of conflict, in this type of war, we are going to see these events take place. We have seen them in the past. We will see them in the future. When you are looking at and you are observing what is essentially a multi-state conflict, you have the Russian Federation fighting the Ukrainians, two large countries that are very much industrialized. Furthermore, you have additional actors in this conflict. You have the Western powers, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the United States, directly supporting the Ukrainian military, both in terms of weapons and equipment, intelligence, and in quite possibly some limited personnel on the ground as well. Now, again, we are going to see this happen in terms of dams being blown up, bridges being blown up. This is what happens in high-intensity armed conflicts. This is what we're seeing. Now, what has happened over the last 3 days? Well, what we are hearing is that the Ukrainians have started a very large offensive operation. It originated in the Donetsk area, but at the same time they have conducted offensive operations across varying sectors of the line of contact. What we're also hearing is that in some of these areas, especially near Donetsk, the operation that the Ukrainians launched has not been going well. We are hearing that the Ukrainians have taken significant casualties in this offensive operation. Some reports indicate as many as 3,000 Ukrainian personnel have been killed or wounded within the last 48 hours. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the Ukrainians are now experiencing maneuver warfare in the modern era, much like the Russians experienced in certain areas high casualty rates in the early onset of this conflict. The Ukrainians are experiencing the same thing. Now, what was the purpose of the demolition of the dam? Was it a designed explosion by the Russians to prevent a Ukrainian counteroffensive over the Dnieper River? Is that possible? Are some of these operations that we're seeing in the east, near Donetsk and other places, simply a feint for the Ukrainians to launch a large-scale amphibious operation across the Dnieper River? Was it the Ukrainians? Were the Ukrainians facing defeat in this new offensive operation, this much heralded, very large offensive operation? Were the Ukrainians intentionally targeting the dam in order to basically give plausible deniability to the effectiveness of its military operation in the south? Difficult to say at this point. We don't know. But this is what happens in these sorts of high-intensity armed conflicts. But again, what we do know right now, based on a multitude of factors, One is the utter silence that is occurring inside the Ukrainian military. If the Ukrainians had succeeded in areas on the eastern Donbass, especially in Donetsk and other areas, we would be hearing about this. The Ukrainians would be reporting mission success. If the Ukrainians faced very stiff resistance and were unsuccessful in gaining territory, then we would not hear anything. The Ukrainians would not announce a defeat, a military defeat. You would not see a Ukrainian military press conference. You would not see a Ukrainian person from the Ukrainian military make an announcement that the offensive has been dealt a defeat. That would not happen. Okay? You would just hear exactly what we're hearing now, utter silence. And then you have this other factor of the demolition of the dam, which does raise some suspicion. You have to ask questions. And I'm saying the Ukrainians destroyed the dam, and I'm not saying the Russians destroyed the dam, although someone destroyed the dam. It was either the Ukrainians or it was the Russians who blew the dam up. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because again, this is what's going to happen in these types of conflicts. You are going to see it, and I would suspect that we're going to see other types of disasters as well. But I suspect right now that the Ukrainians are in the process of doing a reset. They are now trying to figure out, okay, there is a high degree of possibility this is going to be a frozen conflict, if not until the Russians launch more large-scale counteroffensive operations later in the summer, north of Seversk, where I've talked about before. Now, is that going to happen? Again, we don't know. But again, it looks like right now, at least, what the Ukrainians were planning to do was operations in the eastern Donbass. And those operations right now do not appear to have been effective. Now, is it possible that the Ukrainians could launch additional operations in the south, near Orikhiv? We continue to hear about the possibility of Ukrainian operations near Orikhiv, Zaporizhia, but at this point, we don't know. We don't know what this is going to look like in the next week or 2 weeks from now. But what we do know right now is that the Ukrainian military met failure in the areas near Donetsk. And this is absolute. It happened, it occurred, and we know this. Now, again, in all probability, as I talked about before, the risk of nuclear escalation. I've talked about this at the start of the conflict to throughout the conflict, and the possibility of this escalating into a nuclear conflict is, I would say, of moderate risk. And I go back to other conflicts that have happened throughout history, especially recent conflicts, such as World War II, the start of the Spanish Civil War, eventually escalating into now not directly being part of the all-out World War II scenario, but it was part of that time frame. And it did have aspects that eventually led into World War II, fascism versus communism in Spain, left versus right, and then ultimately what we saw in the European theater of operations. It happened. The conflict eventually expanded. Now, while this is not the same type of conflict, nonetheless, it is migrating towards a global conflict. The pieces are in place. You have alliances between the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, Iran, and other nations. And then obviously you have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the United States, that are also on one side. So again, the risk with Ukraine not in the middle, but squarely on the side of these Western powers, again, the risk is very much omnipresent for an expansion of the conflict. And we're very close to this. I don't think people really truly understand just how close the world is right now to something far, far greater than what's occurring right now in Ukraine, unleashing itself upon civilization. But I think we are right now again in the early stages of this operation by the Ukrainians. Doesn't look like it started off very well, and I think we'll see a pause, a reset, and then we'll have to further analyze what's to come at this point. So that's what we have for today. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure. Hopefully I will be creating more content within the next 24 hours. Again, still out here in the 50th state of the Union in Polynesia, aka Hawaii. Have a good day, everybody.